Ladies and gentlemen, let's look into the video. Let's talk about AMD's Vega GPU, shall we? Now you may say to yourself, rightly so might I add, Vega? Why are we talking about Vega? After all, it's not going to be released until 2017. Well, supposedly, that's no longer the case. AMD are considering releasing Vega much sooner. When? October, which is of course going to coincide with the release of Battlefield 1. Vega 10 has been on the cards for a 2017 release for a number of reasons, and one of those is high bandwidth memory 2 availability. We'll get into that in just a second. But you can say either because GP100 isn't going to be released this year, unless Nvidia decides to change their mind now, or because of the fact that the GP104 is looking pretty darn spiffy. Maybe AMD are thinking to themselves, hey, this is actually our opportunity to shine. Now, it's going to be quite interesting because, as I mentioned, it's going to be using HBM2 memory. And from what we've been told, and bear in mind this is only press releases and some speculation, HBM2 memory is not going to enter full mass production until quite late this year, so it's going to be interesting how many GPUs are actually available at retail. By which I mean, is it going to be a paper launch, so it's available, but good bloody luck to you buying one? Is it going to be, they're available, but you might have a bit of difficulty, especially if you live in not a big target market, or maybe there's going to be some price gouging going on, excuse me. And the third option is that they're available fairly plentifully, so you can pretty much go to any retailer and you won't have a difficult time getting them at all. Now, just like Polaris, they are built on 14nm FinFET process, and rather interestingly, they feature 4096 stream processors. The astute among you will say, well, that's very much like the Furies, like the Fury X for example, and you're 100% right behind that. But naturally, it's not just about the number of stream processors, it's about many other different factors. For example, how efficient are those processors? What clock speed are those processors running at? What is the memory throughput to those processors? And we know, of course, from a lot of slides, Polaris has seen quite a few improvements on all of those different factors. For example, it has things such as primitive discard, it has improvements to memory compression, and that's not including high bandwidth memory 2 for ridiculous memory improvements. So it's going to be rather interesting, especially if the clocks we're seeing from Pascal are any indication what AMD are going to be able to achieve with Polaris. Let's say they get 1.6, 2 GHz out of the core of these things. That's going to mean a lot of performance indeed. Your guess is as good as mine what the price is going to be. I'm going to assume, and you know what they say about assumptions, but I'm assuming it's probably going to be roughly at the price points that we're seeing the Furies. That's not a confirmation from AMD, but it would make a lot of sense, because let's say I don't know, the whatever the hell it's going to be called, let's call it the Vega 10X, the high-end Vega, is going to cost like $1,000. How many people are going to afford that? There are going to be some hardcore individuals, but if it's only a single card, maybe, you know, you've got the Titans, I guess, but you've got very limited available market there. But we'll have to see. Do I want the GPU to be released this year? There's a part of me that says yes, but it also means it's going to be really tough for us as customers. So I'm going to take away my reviewer slash enthusiast hat off, and I'm going to instead put on my I'm a regular customer. So you've got this really screwy situation now, because AMD are once again supposedly going to be unveiling Polaris, let's say within the next month-ish. from this event. So that brings us into about mid this year, assuming the release doesn't lag too far behind. But if October comes around and we see Vega, fair enough if you've got $200, $300, $400, doesn't matter. Vega and GP100 do not matter. They, you can't afford them. But if you've got a lot of money and you start being able to afford, let's say, the 1080, or especially if you can afford a 1080 SLI, it means you're in this really weird position of, do you just upgrade to the 1080, or do you say to yourself, well, gee, you know what, I'm just going to wait until October, because, if you start going into the June-ish time, June, July, August, September, October, it's quite a while away, especially if you're waiting, like when you're waiting like 3-4 months, it's a long time, but it's also not that long if you've got the hardware and then suddenly something else comes along. So it's kind of this weird no man's land. What would I suggest? Without seeing reviews, it's really tricky for me to give you advice, and I'm saying this from the perspective of someone who's getting a lot of questions on this exact same subject. I must have gotten at least 2 or 3 people writing to me over the last 24 hours, and I'm not joking. My advice to you is the following. If you don't have enough capital on you to afford the Vegas and the high-end GeForces, let's say the Titans or the 1080 Ti, it's irrelevant. Like, this doesn't really affect you. I would wait for Polaris, because it just makes sense, because the release is not going to be that much further afield. With that said, if you've got a high-end card solution and you've got the money to spend for, I'm assuming the price point of Vega to be like, let's say $500 to $800, let's call it a median of $600, then unless you're really upset with your current graphics solution, I would potentially wait, rather than plonk in and go with dual or triple 1080s. That's not to say don't do it. If you've got the money, by all means feel free. But this is one of those things where there's not really a clear solution. What about if you're someone who just wants a GPU now, but you don't have a lot of disposable income, and you just kind of want to see how the market plays out? Like, you want to get past the price gouging, and you're not looking to really spend a lot of money for the next couple of months. Well, depending on the GPU you've got, I'd consider going either Crossfire or SLI with the current solution, if it's not going to cost you a lot. For example, you might be able to pick up a 7950 or a 7970 for fairly cheap. On the other hand, if you've got a fairly high-end card, or a card which is going to be rather limited, for example, it's got not much VRAM, then you're in a bit of a trickier situation. So I'd, in that case, just maybe suggest you jump on a lower-end Polaris maybe. It's a really going to be a bizarre couple of months, and for me, if we start reviewing these things, it's going to be quite interesting how it all performs, especially to figure out which ones are going to be CPU limited and at what resolution. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.